My name is Asia Rose, and today I'm going to be talking about the effects of density in bluegill. And I chose this topic because I've always been interested in the fisheries and would like to further my education in that field after graduation. So I'll start by saying that bluegill are the most abundant fish across the US, and they can lay up to 60,000 eggs a year, so they reproduce quite a bit. They feed on zooplankton, macroinvertebrates, smaller fish, and fish eggs. And I wanted to look at how quickly they convert their food into mass and how much competition occurs between them. So I started my experiment by sanding Stony Pond in Nelson, New York. And I chose the bluegill because they were the most abundant of the species that we collected. And I also collected some plants that were native to Stony Pond. So that included Elodea, Eurasian water milfoil, and coontail. And all of the fish were returned back to Stony Pond after the experiment was over. So after I got the fish, I had to acclimate them. So there was a week-long acclimation period where they just were in the tanks, not separated by groups or anything. And from there, I had to come up with a range of how I was going to organize the fish into making them all have an equal mass between the three size groups. So I split them up into three groups: young of the year, medium, and large. Young of the year, just first year fish. And I started with the young of the year just because they're the smaller of the other two groups. So it takes more of the larger or more of the young of the year to equal a size, the weight of the medium or large groups. So I ended up with a range of 0.4 to 1 gram for the young of the year, 4 to 6 grams for the medium, and then 9 to 11 for the large. And then I ended up with 28 young of the year in each tank, 4 medium in each tank, and 2 large in each tank. So there was 3 tanks for each size group. And then there was a total of 84 young of the year, 12 medium fish, and six large, with a total of 106 fish. And the starting masses were as close as I could get them. So for the young of the year, it was 61.5. For the medium, it was 64.3. And then for the large, it was 63. You can see the picture of the tank setup after. So throughout the experiment, all of the fish were given 1 gram of fish food daily, and they were weighed individually every 2 weeks. And along with that, I also did a 50% water change. So after analyzing the data, I found that the fish increased in weight significantly by the third week, by week 3, and the young of the year didn't really. You can see there's a decline at week 5, and that was due to mortality, but I'll get to that in a second. The young of the year did have I lost 44 young of the year, so that was about 50% of the young of the year. And I think that was due to competition that was present among them, but hard to observe just because of the number of them. And so that led to about a 10% 10% survival per week. So the survival dropped pretty consistently among the 3 tanks. And for the medium group, the weights increased significantly. They gained about over 1 gram per week. So that was pretty interesting. So their masses were pretty consistent among each of the individual fish per tank. And they didn't really vary much in there. But by the first week alone, they gained a significant amount of weight. And the trend continued. And competition was present, but it wasn't enough to lead to mortality like the young of the year did. Similar to the medium group, the large group also increased throughout the experiment, especially if you look at week 1 to week 3, you could see there's a significant increase. And I did notice that there was competition that was observable in the large group, especially just because there was 2 fish per tank. So there was a more dominant fish who we can assume consumed more of the food and then gained more weight. So there was a 3 to 4 gram weight difference between each of the fish in the large group. From there, since the results for the medium and large groups were pretty similar, I did a t-test to compare the two groups and found that there was a change. If you look at the bolded line at the bottom, it shows that there's a change in the mass per gram of food. So all of the food that the fish were eating was being converted faster than the young of the year and the large group was. And then I wanted to extend my thanks to Dr. Yorks, Scott Prindle, Ian Watkins, and Noah Zudak for all of their contributions throughout my experiment. And I can open it up for any questions.
How did you weigh the fish?
I scooped them out basically just like individually when it like from aquarium to aquarium, and I filled up a little container with some water in it, put the fish in there, well, zeroed it out after the water was on it, put the fish in there, got the mass, and then separated them into a bucket until all of the fish from the aquarium were weighed.
How many young of the year did you start with?
84.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you get the fish from the pond?
By seining. So we just went out and sampled pretty much like the whole like shoreline of the stony pond, and we got quite a few fish.
How many other species were there?
Probably like 3 or 4.
If you had another semester to continue your work, what would you do? What would you do next?
I'd probably continue the experiment longer, just because I didn't really have that much time, so I wasn't sure how long it was gonna take to see any change, or if I would. So if I had more time, I would just spend more time doing it a little bit longer.
How is it like applicable to like the species? Like, what would like the experiment like serve to prove in terms of like what I don't know. Like,
Yeah. I mean, you can compare it to like as a bigger scale. Every body of water has to have enough resources for the food and for the fish, and then it just kind of because they are like a food source for like a lot of larger fish, like largemouth bass and pike. It could be just like a short example of how they can grow fast and become a food source for those larger fish.
Is there anything you would have done differently? I know you talked about the young of the year, a lot of them dying. I don't know. Is there anything you would have done differently?
Yeah, I'd probably try to seine some more, maybe get a little bit more fish for the larger and medium groups, and then maybe add some more aquariums and split up the young of the year a little bit more. But I think it was because of competition that there was some mortality.
It's somewhere in between the density that you had the young of the year and had significant mortality, right? And then the density that you had your medium fish was 4 per aquarium, right, for the medium?
Yeah.
And didn't have any mortality among those.
No.
You think, what would you guess, like if you could add one more category in there in terms of density, where would you go with that? 'Cause somewhere in between there, at least based on the data you have in hand, somewhere in between there you went from not enough competition, not dense enough in terms of individuals to have no mortality, at least over the 6 weeks of the experiment, versus the young of the year, which you had mortality. It was very consistent across the aquarium.
Yeah. I mean, I'd maybe add another size group between the young of the year and medium just to see if it was the size of the fish that caused the difference, because the young of the year were significantly smaller than the rest of the fish. But I do think it's just because there was such a large number of young of the year in one tank that they were competing against their resources.
did you have any like fixtures in the tank, like aeration tanks? Because I know you said there was like 84 young of the year in one tank at once. Maybe they like suffocated.
Yeah, so the young of the year were split up between 3 tanks, so there was only 28 per tank.
Okay.
But every one of the aquariums had air stones in them and plants to make them like less shy, I guess, or not shy, but scared, just to make it mimic a more natural environment.
How long did it take you to set this all up, like numbers of hours?
It took me all 3 days of the weekend, plus, I don't know, it probably took me like 5 days total, 4 or 5 days. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in here. I mean, just on the weekend alone, I got in here at 8 o'clock in the morning the one day, and I wasn't done until 10 o'clock, so It took quite some time.
Any other questions for Asia? All right, very nice.